So let's move to an example of a database search on Web of Science. Now, the term Web of Science is a bit misleading because, as we mentioned earlier, this is a really powerful database which covers all subjects in the arts and humanities and social sciences as well as science. So just a reminder of how you get to a Web of Science. There are two ways to do it. One of them is to go through the recommended databases, as I've demonstrated here. The other one is to go through your best friend, the subject guide, and it shows it as a key transdisciplinary database here. Now, I just wanted to show you the same search terms that we used in Business Source Complete. So I've done exactly the same thing. Each website looks very slightly different, but the principle of having the search boxes and the Boolean operators is exactly the same. And here we have the results on Web of Science. And you remember with Business Source Complete, it was a very specialist database. We came up with about 1,000 searches, which were very much geared towards business, finance, economics, management. Because this is Web of Science, we use the same search terms, but we come up with a lot of results, 6,000 or so. But there's a reason for that. It's because it's so cross-disciplinary. So that's not a reason to be concerned. So again, what we do is, you remember the left-hand panel here, which is really, really helpful for refining our searches. What's really important about Web of Science, and the top tip to share, is that under the Web of Science categories, you will find a rich source of information on different subject areas and disciplines. So although the top examples it shows us are not surprisingly educational research, management, business, which means that it's the right database for us to search specifically for innovation and entrepreneurship as well. If we go to more options and values, this is really stupendously brilliant, because what it does is it gives you a breakdown into many different disciplines and areas. So my advice with Web of Science is to always give yourself a few minutes to look at these categories, because this is the strength of Web of Science. And it can help you to identify material that will best fit your search.
And I'd also just say, particularly with the centre, you're working with people from 30 different disciplines. You're also then potentially working on a subject that crosses multiple disciplines. So it's not a case of just going, oh, well, I'm interested in, I don't know, I'm a geographer, so geographic and physical. Actually, what I would like to do here is do geography, because I am interested. I'd probably do a business one, and I'd find someone that made me go, oh, food science. Okay, food science. It's that inquisitiveness of this. Again, it's prompts to kind of generate. But this database is just so good for you. If you think about what we ask you to do, we always ask you to look at things across a breadth of disciplines, but with a consistent theme often. So it couldn't be more tailor-made for the work that we ask you to do.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. And as Kit was saying, food science technology was one example. Look at other potentially relevant categories. For example, it's got green sustainable science technology, it's got gerontology, what do you do with the senior citizens, people who are more advanced in age, ergonomics. It's a really valuable resource. So again, it's worth doing that and spending a bit of time on it.
And again, recording what you're using here, taking notes of the kind of things that work and the things that don't. It doesn't have to be long. A couple of lines you can read in a year when you're interested again. That's all.
Absolutely. What I've also done now is I've decided to show you a search which shows fewer results, which again is quite useful to give you an example of how if you pick something much more specific, then it would be slightly less daunting in terms of the results, and it will, even though it's a Web of Science. So the topic I've chosen is the use of citizen science in green spaces. And the key words are green space. And again, this is another example. Green space is very often spelt as a single word. So I've chosen green space as a single word or as two words, but I've also included things like park or nature reserve. By the way, there's a mistake here. There shouldn't be two ors here, so I'll take them out now. Don't want to confuse anybody. Okay.
Important when you're reviewing, you go through, you put it out and you go, okay, there's two ors. That's probably what failed it.
Exactly. And the other thing that's worth bearing in mind, this is 2 search boxes effectively, but you might want to start thinking about a 3rd search box. For example, in order to narrow your search, you might think in terms of a specific continent or a country. You might want to focus on a specific set of individuals like young people or senior citizens. But this is not necessarily something you want to do right now, but it's something that's in the back of your mind. So let's have a look at our results. So this is what it looks like when I put in the search terms. And these are the results. We have about 300 results. And remember, because it's a live database, don't be alarmed if you replicate a result and find a different number of searches. Normally it'll be more because this database we're constantly adding to the database basically. So just like in Business Source Complete, you can refine your limits by limiting the publication years. You can do exactly the same thing that we mentioned earlier, in other words, to look at the categories. And here they're slightly different, understandably, because it's a kind of an ecological scientific thing. So ecology and environmental sciences come up. But if we look at the more options and values, this is again really, really interesting, because again, spend the time and look at this. I mean, the one thing that struck out for me in my own personal interest in the area was public environmental occupational health, which is really, really helpful to look at. But spend time looking at those. Once I decided to click on public environmental occupational health, it limited my searches to just 8 results, but that's very specific. It's down to you to decide whether you want to expand or contract at this point. Me, I decided to contract, and then I can always go back and increase again. And again, as Keir has been saying, what's really, really useful is have a look at the titles, have a look at the keywords that are being used, because this is incredibly useful. For example, there's one here which picks up on citizen science and exploring neighbourhood influence on ageing well, which is exactly the sort of thing I was looking for. So that sort of stuff is really useful to bear in mind.
I'd just say, so for that, for example, you might find some interesting papers on. Also, you can use that term in something like Google, right? To go, okay, let's just see if there's any that comes up as any interesting videos, images, photos in archives. You know, once you start to kind of refine these and think about what your terms are, starts to refine what you're actually researching, but keeping records of that and then reusing those allows you to sort of build and not just have to start from fresh every time. Says someone who used to start fresh every time and had to learn this.
That's a really good point. You're kind of building all the time, you're building up, absolutely. So just to say that in Web of Science, these are mainly organized in terms of relevance, but also in terms of the most recent. For example, you see here, this one is literally brand new, October 20, oh no, that isn't actually, June 2000. Actually, no, it wasn't. The relevance did not come up with the most up to date. So you can change that. You can change according to how up to date it is. So how lately they were put on, but also time cited. Time cited is really good as well, because if something is influential and really useful, then you will find it's been cited a lot. So it's worth bearing that in mind as well.
And also you will find, depending on the database, who has cited that paper. So I think Google Scholar does that, which again, if there's 10,000 citations for this particular paper, you know, it's not going to be that many, but you can then dig in and go, okay, well, this paper cited it. Ah, and that's now, you know, this might be referencing 1972, but there's one from this year that references it. Again, leads. It's like a detective thing almost.
That's a really good point, because if we look at this one here, a monitoring tool for the provision of accessible and attractive urban green spaces, it's an article from 2003. It's old, but it's influential because it's been cited 221 times. So that's really, really useful. So as Keir said, you can either click on the time cited here and look at it, or if you're on Google Scholar, you can do a Google Scholar with the title and it'll give you where it was cited as well. And Google Scholar is really good in that way. If you're not going through a database, absolutely, that's brilliant. And here's another example of what happens when you're looking at, as Keir has been saying, look at the abstract, because with the great thing is you can click to make sure you look at the abstract, read the abstract, it'll give you a really good idea of whether it's useful or not. And if you're, unlike Business Source Complete, it won't give you embedded the full text in Web of Science. It will give you the Get It button, and then you go to the library page and it shows you where you can access it. So it's slightly different from Business Source Complete in that sense.
And again, if you have any issues actually getting it, even if you can get on the page, you can contact the library. That's why.
Absolutely.
Well-funded, incredibly skilled set of people and resources to call on. So
and always happy to help. You know, if you can't find something and it's really important, get an interlibrary loan, or we can get you an ebook or anything like that. Very much so. The final thing to bear in mind is how you've come up with a good search terms, a good search, you're getting good results. How do you save that? Or how do you email it to yourself? So the first thing to say is you can email your results on Web of Science by going to email. The other thing you can do is if you're using EndNote online, and you can actually go to export and you can click EndNote online there. So if you have an EndNote online account, you can do it that way. If you don't, you can email it to yourself. So they're both equally good ways of doing things. So I guess those are the two main things I wanted to say, other than try out a search on Web of Science. Think of a topic, spend 5 minutes writing down your key concepts. Think of one or more alternative terms for each concept. Build your search in the way that Ciara and I have been describing and working with you by using and/or, and have a go.
And just to add to that, obviously want you to do this on particular projects. It's also quite fun in that I can be like, right, I want to know about drone technology and I don't know, personal transportation, just to see what's going on. Type these things in, you know, I want to know, is there anything related between, I don't know, cabbage growth and I don't know, something to do with the kind of technical computer industry, right? Go and put cabbage to computer industry. You know, again, this is a starting point. It's a font of knowledge that we are incredibly privileged to have. I mean, not just in terms of being a university, even in the last 20 years, this would be unthinkable what you have at your fingertips, utterly unthinkable. I'm not saying you don't know how lucky you are, but what I'm saying is make the most of it because it's incredible.